And the first thing I'll do is just make a copy of this sketch. So I think I showed this before, but if you go to File in the P5 editor and go to Duplicate, you can make a copy of the sketch. And you can do this with other people's sketches as well if you want to copy somebody else's sketch and add to it. So I'm just going to click on the name and update this. So we're going to be talking about variables and conditionals today. So a couple new programming concepts that will give us a little bit more flexibility with our sketch. So first I'm just going to clean up the code that I have here a little bit. I'm going to increase the text size a bit. So I'll update my comment here. So we're talking about variables and conditionals today. And today is the 10th. And I'll get rid of some of these notes. And I'll leave everything else the same for now. And so this is kind of where we left off, where I can make like a little drawing on the canvas using the mouse, just by dragging the mouse around. And I'm just drawing little purple circles or ellipses. So we're going to add to this a bit today. We're going to give the user the ability to change the color and do other things using our keypressed function. So right now if I double click, it hides the drawing and redraws the background. And if I hit a key on the keyboard, it saves the drawing, it downloads the drawing to my computer. So there's the drawing, although I hadn't drawn anything here. And so what we'll do today is add a bit to this so that we can have more precise control over the keys and also the drawing that we're creating. And so this involves introducing a couple of new concepts in programming. And programming is a little tricky when you're first starting to learn it, because most code just kind of uses all of the concepts together at the same time, and they work with each other. So in order to kind of like go over the concepts, sometimes we have to kind of pair them together to see how they fit together. But they don't always have to go together. They're kind of like these little different building blocks that we use together to build different types of programs. So we're working on this like one style of program right now, but just keep in mind that these concepts apply to any different type of program that you might create. So what we'll start with is creating a variable so that we can change the color of our drawing. So right now if I make a drawing, I have this purple color, and you can see that purple is the stroke as well as the fill here. I probably had it set up like that because I was drawing a line before, but let's get rid of some of that to simplify it. So let's just draw just the fill. I can remove this frame rate as well. I'm not going to need that today. So I'm going to say no stroke just to simplify this a little bit. And so when we drag the mouse, we'll just fill purple, and then we'll draw a circle where we're filling. So this value here, purple, is what's known as hard-coded data. So if I change this to like blue or something, we can see there's a new color in the drawing. But I can't change this once the program is started, right? When I hit that play button, this color is going to stay blue. And there's nothing I can do to change that except go back to my code and change what the code says. Okay, so that's called hard-coded. That's a shorthand or a term that means the value that's coded in here can't change. It's always going to be that one value. So there's a couple other things in here that are hard-coded. Hard-coded isn't necessarily like a bad thing, but it's something that as your program gets more complicated, you'll tend to avoid. So another thing that's hard-coded is the 10 right here. Once I start the program, that 10 is the size of my ellipse, and that doesn't change no matter what I do unless I change the code. So if I change this to like 20, now my ellipse is bigger, but it's still just one value. It can't change. So something that's not hard-coded is the mouse X and the mouse Y. Those are both variables, and they're variables that P5 has created for us to help us track where the mouse is. So the mouse X is always changing if I move the mouse, and same thing with the mouse Y. So these values are not hard-coded, they're variable values.
What if I added to them?
So if you add, like if I add mouse X plus 10 or something like that,
yeah.
So now you have a variable plus a hard-coded number.
Okay.
So you have two pieces of data that are being added together for one argument. So now your variable is still variable, but the 10 here is hard-coded. So if we want to give the user the ability to change this color, then what we need to do is create a variable that saves that color and then give the user the ability to change it. So that's a two-step process that involves a couple different concepts. So let's talk about variables first. And the way that we create a variable, I'm going to create a variable and then I'll explain a little bit more of what it is. So the way that we create a variable, typically you can create a variable wherever you want, but most of the time what you'll see is the variables are at the beginning of the program. And when you see a variable up here at the beginning of the program, this is called a global variable. The reason it's called global is if we make the variable first, then the variable will exist inside of all of the different functions that we have. And we want that because we're going to be using it in two different places. We're going to be using it when we drag the mouse to decide what color to draw. And we're also going to be using it when we press a key to change the value of that color. So we need a global variable. You can also create variables inside of your functions, and those are called local variables. They only exist inside of the function, but we're not going to worry about that right now. So the first variable I'm going to create, the way I write a variable in JavaScript is just by typing var, which is a shorthand for variable. You can see that in P5 it's highlighted yellow, just like my function, because it's a keyword. It's a word that always means the same thing in the language. So anytime I write var in JavaScript, it's the same thing as writing function. It can only do one thing, as opposed to my function names like setup or create canvas. These are things that get defined by the library or by us as developers. So var is the key word to declare a variable, and then we just need a name for the variable. The name can be anything we want, as long as it's letters and numbers and no spaces. So just like all of the functions that you see here, we can just create a name for the variable and we can call it whatever we want. If I want to call it banana, it'll work just as well as if I call it something that's more descriptive, like fill color. But typically we want to name it something that explains what it does. That makes it easier for people reading our code to understand what the point of the code is. So I'm going to name this variable fill color. So it kind of explains what it's doing. It's the color of the fill that we're using for our drawing. And notice I used the camel case. So I started with a lowercase f and then capital C for the second word. So that's the JavaScript convention. So far I've used the variable keyword, and then I use the name of the variable that I want to create. And then when I'm creating a variable, I use the equal sign. And this is called, in JavaScript and programming, we call this an operator. So it's like in math, but it does something a little bit different than what you would expect in math. In math, when I use the equal sign, I'll just draw on here. So in math, when I use the equal sign, like if I say x equals 5, I'm saying that the value of x, this variable, is the same as 5. That's not exactly what's happening in code. In code, what I'm really saying is I want to have, so the way we can think of a variable is if we think about the memory on our computer, let's imagine on our computer there's a hard drive and it's this big array of little pieces of data, something like this, like a big spreadsheet basically. And each one of these little pieces of data has a name, but it's some crazy name that only computers would recognize, like 684x5, some crazy thing. And so let's say we want to have this fill color, and we want our computer to remember what the value is. So we're going to say, take this little guy here, take this one little cell here, and name this fill color. My drawing is kind of goofy, but you can see what I mean. So name this guy fill color, and then put, so this is where equals comes in, put a value in it. So at the end, we're going to say we want the fill color to be blue. So what we're telling our program is we want you to take this value, which is the string blue, which is really just the letters BLUE in computer memory, and assign it to this thing called the fill color. And all that does is it saves that value so that when we reference it later, the computer remembers what it is. So it remembers it, but we can also change it. Okay, so now if I replace my blue in my fill with fill color, this is no longer hard-coded. So let's actually leave this here and comment it out. And let's say fill color. This is a variable. So now my color is the same, but instead of this blue, which can't change, I now have a variable which can change. And so we'll look at how to do that next, but I can, so for example, I can say purple up here, and now I have purple. Or I can say red, and now I have red. Okay, so we're going to change that value, but we need to add in a bit more code before we can do that. But let's pause for a second. I'll turn this back to blue. And so notice now, so we have this variable, the fill color, and we can use it down here. So just as an example, I'll make another variable just to kind of repeat the process. We won't be using this one as much today, but just to show that we can use other types of data. So I can make a variable, and we'll call this line width, or let's call it brush size. That'll be a little bit more better. And right now we have the brush size is 10. So I'll put 10 here. And then I can take this variable and replace the number. Whoops, I don't know what that was. Let's copy this and paste it down here. So again, the sketch isn't going to change because the number is the same thing. But now look at what my code looks like. It's much easier to understand, right? I have an ellipse, or let's call this a circle, since we're just drawing a circle. I have a circle at the mouse X position and mouse Y position, and the size is the brush size. And our brush size is up here. And so this is another reason why you typically in a program you'll see your variables at the top, because if you write your code well, somebody else can look at this and say, oh, okay, I want to change the brush size to 20, and now they have the brush size is 20, and they don't even have to read the code because it's clear that this variable is used to set the brush size. Okay, so those are two examples of variables. Now we want to change our variables. So let's introduce a new concept. So it's a little, we're getting into a lot of stuff today. So, if it's kind of confusing, that's okay, but we'll be reviewing it a couple times. Okay, any questions on variables before we add our conditional statement?
Brush size is one word.
Yeah, variable has to, so your variable cannot be more than one word. I mean, it can be more than one word, but it can't have more than one line of text. So if I put a space in here, I'll get an error when I try to run this code.
Yeah, so I just did it and I got an error, but oh, maybe because it's like 110.
Let me see.
Because so for me, I had put it was 80 and 10. So
So you can't. So for this one, you can only use one value. You can't have a variable that represents two values. Well, you can, but not with this, the way it's written here. So you can make two values. You could have like the brush width and brush height.
oh, got it.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Okay. So in other words, I would have to state that I want something separate. Like.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So if you're drawing a brush that has, if you're using a rectangle or a line or something like that, you may need more than one variable. So if I turn this back to an ellipse and I need another variable for the ellipse, then I would want something like variable brush width equals 10, variable brush height equals 20. And you can make as many variables as you want. There's no limit. So then I would have two values, and now I have an ellipse that's taller than it is wide. So yeah, if you have like more than just that size, if you're using like something that's not a circle, you may need to add more variables. But today I actually just want to focus on the color, not the brush size at the moment. Okay. Any other questions? Okay. So let's talk about conditionals. So a conditional is a statement that we write when we want to make a choice. And so what we're going to do in our key pressed, so the other day you guys actually asked about this. How do I change, to different things in the key press? How do I ask which key it is? And so that's what we're going to look at now. So when I press a key, there are different values that we get from a key press. But if we want to know which value it is, we have to use a conditional statement. So let's take a look at the P5 reference for a second. And so we're looking at events, and we basically want to know which key has been pressed. And there's a couple ways to do that. One is just the key, which will tell you, if the key is like A or B or something like that. We can see in this example, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, or 1, 2, 3, 4. Any key that I hit, it's just like the mouse X, mouse Y. The browser knows which key was being typed. So one is just the key itself. Another way is using the key code. You can see each key has a different code that is set in the browser. And this is this is how it used to be done. They used to not have the key and the key code. You just had to use the key codes. Now you can use either one. The key code is a little bit better because it's the same on every computer, whereas the key might be encoded differently in different computers. So you can use either one. I'm going to use the key code. There's a website that will show you what key is what. If you go to keycode.info and just type any key, it'll show you what the key code is. So when we are pressing a key, so we know that we're pressing the key because we save the drawing. But what if we want to select different keys to do different things? So let's delete our drawing right now. And so I'm going to just log. So we can see console.log key and key code. I'm going to run this. Okay, so if I click on the canvas, I have to click on the canvas because otherwise it doesn't have focus, and so it won't actually register the key presses. So I have to click on the canvas first, and now if I hit A, you can see A 65, B 66, C 67, 1, 2, 3. So we can see what those values are, but now we have to use code to decide what to do based on that value. So for that, we are going to use what's called a conditional statement. So let's get rid of this and write our first conditional statement. And so the way a conditional statement works is we ask the computer a question. And with a computer, everything has to come down to either a yes or no question. So you may have multiple options, but you can't ask, is it one of three things? You have to ask, is it this one, is it this one, is it this one? And there's different ways that the computer lets you do that. Some of them are more complex than others. We're going to start with a pretty simple way to do it. So we're just going to say if. It's pretty simple. Anytime you might ask a question, you might say, you know, if it's cold outside, I'm going to wear a jacket. If it's warm outside, I'm not going to wear a jacket. So we're just creating the condition that's either true or false. It's either yes or no. In code, we have to create a condition that can either be true or false. And in our conditional statement, we just say if, and then we have a parentheses. So it looks a little bit like our functions. And then we have a curly brackets. And so if tells the computer we're evaluating a condition. The parentheses is where that condition goes. And then the curly brackets is the code that we want to run if the condition is true. So the way that we evaluate a condition is by comparing it to a value. So we can say if key code. And in JavaScript, when we compare two values, we can either use 2 equal signs or we can use 3 equal signs. The difference is a little bit confusing. It basically just means that 2 equal signs means they're the same value. 3 equal signs means they're the same value and the same type. So generally, it's good to use 3 equal signs. So this is more like what you have in math when you say x equals 5. You're actually saying these two values are the same thing. So if our key code, let's say, let's use G for green. So the key code for G is 71. So if our key code equals 71, we're going to change our fill. So I'm going to go into my brackets and hit enter to go to a new line. And I'm going to take my variable, fill color, and I'm going to change it. I'm going to say fill color equals green. And so a couple things to notice here. Notice that I didn't use VAR again. Once I create the fill color, my program knows it exists, so I don't have to use it again. I just use the name of the variable. And then again, I use the single equal sign for assignment to say what value goes into the variable. And then I have a string. Let me use double quotation marks to be consistent. Then I have a string that says what this new value is going to be. And normally, if I'm writing something like this, I'm going to format this real quick. Normally, if I'm writing something like this where the key code is a number, I'll usually put a comment and say like G so that I remember which key it is because I might not be able to remember off the top of my head. So we're going to do G for green. So now if I play my sketch, I can draw with blue and I can hit G and now I have green. But I can't go back to blue. I haven't written that yet. So now I'm stuck with green. Okay, so that's our first conditional statement. And so then we can keep going from there. Any questions on the conditional statement? Okay, so let's write a couple more, and then we'll be almost done with the lesson for today.
And
So,
you can keep adding them within the same function, correct?
yes.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. So we're going to keep, so we don't want to, so we want to stay inside of key press. This is the only function, we only need to use this one function for all of our key presses. And then we're just going to kind of sort them using our different conditions. And there's a few other ways to do conditions, but we're just going to keep it simple with our if statement. Okay, so let's do another one, if key code. So let's go back to blue. So if I hit B, that's 66. Okay, so if key code equals 66, fill color gets blue. And when I say when I'm talking about this code, when I say the triple equal sign or the double equal sign, I'll usually say equals because that's really what it's saying is that this key code is the same as this. When I use a single equals, I'll usually say gets because I'm assigning this value into this variable that I have. Okay, so let's add to this. So now I have blue, I have green, and I can go back to blue, go back to green. And so now I can make a slightly more interesting drawing. And
you said equal for 3 and gets for 1.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so this is the B key. And we'll add one more. If key code equals R, which is 82, then we'll say the fill color is red. So now we have our 3 basic colors, RGB. So I have blue, red, green. And so I'm doing this so that they line up, but you don't necessarily have to have the G key match green. You could make this like 1, 2, and 3 on the keyboard. It doesn't have to actually match. It just all you have to do is say whatever this condition is, this is what I want the fill color to be. So it doesn't have to be that blue makes blue. I can change this to purple, and now when I hit B, I get purple. So I'm just doing that because they match, but they don't have to match.
Mine didn't do it for some reason. Key code equals 65, right? Oh, 66. Never mind.
Yeah, 65 is A. So if you put in 65, it'll work if you hit A. All right, so let's add a couple more just to bring back some of our previous functionality. So let's do, to clear the background, I'll say if key code equals C, 67. This is kind of arbitrary, but we can just use this. So I'll do C. That will draw our background back in. Okay, so now I can make a drawing, and if I hit C, that will clear the background, and I can keep drawing again. And then let's do S to save. So if key code equals S, which is 83, then we'll save drawing.jpg. So again, it doesn't have to be S. You could change this to, enter or space or whatever you want it to be for any of these. But those are just some basics that we can use. Okay, so now I can make my drawing, add some different colors. And if I hit S, that'll save the drawing. Okay, so there's my drawing. What else can I do? Those are both of the functions that we had last time. So now we have everything inside our key press. We don't have to use other events, and we can change anything that we want to. So if you want to change the brush size with different keys, you can do that. If you want to change the shape, you could change the shape. You could do lots of different stuff here. We'll stick with this for now since we introduced a couple new concepts. I'll give you guys some time to play around with this. So try changing the color. Try making other changes if you want to. What we're eventually going to work towards is adding some variability to the brushes. So keep in mind that you can change the brush as well. So if I wanted a more interesting brush, I could copy my circle a couple times and maybe add and subtract and add and subtract. I'm just kind of doing some random numbers. So now I have like a brush that has 3 parts. And we'll look at a couple things on Thursday that can add some more randomness to this to make it a little bit more interesting. But for now, just play around with this basic setup and see what you can come up with.
What did you do for the save again?
That one I did
save. You just change it to save. Got it.
Yeah, I just use the save function, which saves the image. And then you just have to give it a name of the image and the image type you want. It can be either JPEG or PNG. Okay. So we'll do a couple more variations on Thursday. For now, you guys can just play around with the values here. So I'll save this and post it on the Discord. And I'll upload this video in a bit. Let me say what this is. And I'll put a link to this key code website. Oh, I guess it changed. Oh, yeah. Okay. It changed owners recently, so now it has a new URL.
And this conditional doesn't have anything to do with the variables, correct?
No, the conditional and the variables are kind of separate. So the conditional is one concept, and we can use it together. So we're using the condition to set the variable, but they don't necessarily have to be used together. Okay, let me stop recording.